My name is Craig Downer. I'm a wildlife ecologist. I'm here to point out the Streator light reflectors. These Streator light reflectors have been placed here by the efforts of Julie Keller and myself and her husband Lauren, which was a long fight with the Department of Transportation, but finally they installed them and they're working wonderfully. They're preventing the collisions with the wild horses and the deer and the rabbits and the coyotes because it causes them to freeze in their tracks. All right, it breaks the light beam into a spectrum, and the near infrared causes the animals to freeze in their tracks for some mysterious reason. That's how they evolved over millions of years. By the way, we're just east of Dayton and Virginia City. You can see Virginia Range here, and there are quite a few wild horses here.
Craig, why aren't these reflectors on all the highways across America?
They should be. That would be the obvious way of living in harmony with these animals, and it would just be at minor expense.
Thousands of people are killed a year because of collisions with deer.
Yeah, and millions of animals.
And millions of animals. Why isn't this being done? And you were part of making this happen?
Yes, that's right, because I used to work for the Animal Protection Institute, and I remembered about these. So, yeah. Julie Keller, several years ago, and her husband Lauren spearheaded the movement to get these Streator light reflectors placed here in Lyon County, right out of Dayton, and they were successful.
Now the BLM is starting to use the excuse that they have to remove wild horses, off the range because they're coming around the roads, at the exclusion of mentioning deer, elk, and others, when they could just use this.
Right. They could, in many areas, they could use this, and they could, that would allow man to live in harmony with the wild horses. All right, my name's Craig Downer. I'm a wildlife ecologist here, fourth generation Nevadan. We're starting a journey to either approve or disprove. We're beginning a journey to either prove or disprove BLM's claims about the wild horses. This is the Pine Nut Range in the background. Pine Nut Range in the background, it's the legal herd area, 26 miles long and 15 miles wide. In the foreground is the Buckskin Range, and that's a range where the BLM just recently went in last autumn and eliminated the horses, claiming they weren't there in 1971. But I grew up here all my life, and I remember they were always there. And now they have declared horse-free area on 60% of the Pine Nut Range, and I think that's very unfair. And they only leave about 120 wild horses there in this vast range. And they were a wonderful asset to the ecosystem. So we're going to examine this, and we're going to go down throughout the Battle Mountain District, and we're going to look at many of the herds and some of the adjacent herds, like the Montgomery Pass herd, which is a self-stabilizing herd on the California-Nevada border. We'll be there, that'll be the first one we'll look at today.
How many horses were here when you were growing up, do you know?
There was, as I recall, there was about 2,000 in the range. And they were in a wonderful shape. They were dispersed in their bands, their band home ranges, and there was no problem with overgrazing. The problem was with the greedy ranchers, the sheepers, and the cattle ranchers that were trying to dispossess them, and also the hunters, because they resented the wild horses there. But in fact, the wild horses helped enhance the ecosystem because they're a different type of herbivore. They don't as thoroughly decompose what they eat. And they also prevent fires by eating dry, flammable vegetation, and they help build the soils with their droppings and spread the seeds for germination. Now they were wonderful horses. I have pictures of them going way back in the 60s and 70s. You know what they've decided now is to leave a non-viable population on just a tiny, less than half of what they're legally entitled to, and to dispossess them from the Buckskin Range, where they in fact did occur in 1971. And they used the Indian agent Robert Hunter, and I have his letter, I'll show it to you. And he claimed in the name of the Indians they had inholdings, that they did a very underhanded thing there. And because the Indians have a number of inholdings, still minor compared with the public lands, they had the Bureau of Indian Affairs agent Robert Hunter write a letter in behalf of the Indians asking for total removal of all wild horses from the Pine Nut Range. That was a nasty, underhanded thing to do. And I went and talked to the chairperson of the Washoe tribe, and he said, they're using us. And many of those Indians loved the wild horses, and they said, we don't like this. There should be wild horses here. They're our brothers. All right. Saying I have to format the stupid thing. That's ridiculous. I'm getting this camera from a lady paying so much every month. It's supposed to be like a camera's worth thousands of dollars, but it does some real tricky things. It's pretty complicated. A lot of times it just refuses to take. Are you filming them?
Yes.
Good. Oh, this I don't get. It's not working. Okay, my name is Craig Downer. I'm a wildlife ecologist. We're here at the south end of Walker Lake. It's right near Hawthorne, a military town. And there's about 120 horses here that have been here for as long as civilized man can remember. They were part of the Indian ponies. And recently the BLM had planned to totally eliminate them, to round them all up. But a number of people, including Simona Netherlands, Respect for Horses, and Kudo and Carla Bowers, rallied, and they rallied citizens of Hawthorne to keep them here. And they got, since they're on military land, this army base, they got the commander to pull out. Okay, they got the commander of the army base here to pull out the request for the BLM to totally remove them, and they're still here. And all they have to do is build a fence so they no longer come up here and be hit on the highway.
Okay.
All right, they want a fence to be built so they'll no longer, they want to have a fence here built down to the lake so they can no longer come up, and they have been struck and killed here. So that's, they agreed to do that. The community and the army base agreed to build the fence, but so far I don't see the fence. It's necessary because the lake has been receding with global warming and the hogging of the water resources around Yerington by the ranchers. But it's agreement, and they should work it out, and this herd that's been a wonderful, harmonious component of the ecosystem for well over 100 years should be allowed to continue, and that is the agreement. So it is a victory for the wild horses. We just have to make sure it proceeds as planned.
Well, they could put up the reflectors, couldn't they?
Yeah, they could also put up the streeter light reflectors, which cause animals to freeze in their tracks, just like we saw east of Dayton, and that are proving very effective in preventing collisions, especially at nighttime when they occur.
And tell us about what the cattle ranchers are doing to the lake here.
Well, there's some real greedy cattle ranchers. They're used to hogging the water, and now with global warming there's less water supply, although recently there's been more in this year, but they've been hogging the water there and depriving Walker Lake, which is also very important for many migratory waterfowl. And it's been drying up, and if it becomes so salty that the fish start dying, then so many of the migratory birds like the pelicans and the loons that migrate here would have no longer any source of food, and they would perish. So it's become a real vital issue, and also for the wild horses here, which contribute so much. So they're negotiating with the ranchers to make. See, now there's a big push by the states' rights activists or advocates to deny the federal government water for wild horses and for even for wildlife. So anyway, it's a battle, but we have to insist that those ranchers release the water from the into the Walker River, and that it continue to replenish this magnificent Walker Lake. And the Sierra Club has a branch to defend Walker Lake as well, the local Toyabe chapter. That's one good thing they're doing.
Okay, so you see, listeners, how important it is to curb your intake of beef, dairy products, because beef and dairy consume 80% of our water. Just to grow the corn to feed these animals consumes so much fuel. They say that if you become a vegan, that you eliminate in carbon footprint all the driving that you would be doing just by not eating beef and dairy products. So please do your part for the horses and for your children and for your health on every aspect. Please, please help us to save what's beautiful on this planet, because there isn't a lot of time left. I go.
All right, this is Mount Grant. It's holy to the Paiutes here, the northern Paiutes. It's the center of creation. And they say it's one of the last areas that's never been grazed by European man's domestic livestock. It's a really sacred mountain. It's involved with the myth of the coyote and the creation of life on earth. Very holy to the Paiutes and should be preserved as such. There is a herd of wild horses here. Their tradition was to migrate up there during the summer months to graze in the higher elevations, but now with this major Highway 95, they can be hit and struck. So there should be some sort of an overpass provided for them here so that they can continue their age-old migration. They also migrate to the mountains just to the east here. Okay, occurring up there are the original pristine grasslands, the tussock grasslands with the bushes. Now the horses could act as dispersers of their seeds, since they don't as thoroughly decompose what they ingest, and they could restore these wonderful tussock or bunch grasses in areas where the cattle have overgrazed and destroyed those ecosystems. So that's the great value of the horse here, and this Mount Grant is a center for restoration of native plants and animals, and the horse fits right in there because it's more native than just about any animal you can mention in this part of the world or in North America.
Good.
All right, this is the Marietta Burro Range. It's been federally declared for the preservation of the wild burros, which were descendants of the old prospectors' burros. Actually, they're very much like the species that evolved here in North America. Unfortunately, they're allowing too few to remain here, only about 125, I believe, exact number. This is the Carson City district of the Bureau of Land Management, and that's not even a viable population genetically. The burros have greatly lost out. Most of their herd areas have been emptied out, and there's been a real campaign of to discredit and eliminate them. So we're going to go in now and see this. There's also a wild horse herd in here, and further on the Montgomery Pass herd, which is a self-stabilizing herd in the Inyo National Forest. So it looks like we have a beautiful day here in midwinter, February 2nd, just about noon, and we're hoping to see some burros real soon.
That's February 2011.
2011, yeah, February 2nd. It's Wednesday.
I'd like you to note, listeners, look at how empty this land is. That could be filled with wild horses, with burros, for our delight.
Yeah, they would, the individual bands, horses have bands, like harem structures, but burros have a little different social society where they have more of a herd that interbreeds without one jack dominating. In a wild horse band, often one stallion will dominate, and he'll have a few to several mares in their progeny, whereas in a burro band, it can be a mixture of several jacks and quite a number of mares, or what they call jennies, I guess. Now these burros are really well adapted to these dry climates. They're able to conserve water, and when it gets hot in the summer, their large ears are able to radiate the heat. And they're really very wise and gentle animals, and like as the horse does, their droppings help build the soils and disperse the seeds so they can germinate in many different plants. And the burro also has its roots in North America, just like the Cabaline horse and the zebra. So they belong here. They're a restoration, and they're very, very similar to a horse.
Can you address to the public, you know, in Africa, you have millions of zebras, so particularly before the advent of white civilization, and they never destroyed the environment.
Yeah.
And here it's all empty. And what is the ratio that BLM is giving? 1 burro per 7,000 acres or something?
Yeah, in many of these areas where they had their legal 1971 areas, what they're planning to leave, their so-called appropriate management level, just boils down to 1 horse or burro for every 1,000 acres, or sometimes it's as much as 7,000 or more acres. Or in areas where they've zeroed them out, of course, there's none left. They've just decided that they don't want them there anymore, and they always concoct reasons. It's just outrageous. So we're going to expose this. And this is another example of their saying, oh, here's our sanctuary where we have 125 burros left. They don't say anything about all the other areas where they've zeroed them out. Which so it really is it's a whitewash and a hypocrisy. That's why when I was invited to come out to the dedication, I said, no, I'm not coming, because I don't want to be part of this injustice and this saying this is fulfilling the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act, when in fact it's making a mockery of it. Well, the reasons they give for justifying such low numbers in these vast areas is that they have to abide by multiple use. That means they have to allow mainly livestock, cattle and sheep, to graze along with the horses. But what they don't mention is that the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act says that in their legal areas, which were about at least 12% of the public lands on the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management jurisdictions, they are to have principal priority, and they're just not giving them. In most areas, they're only allowing it 25% of the forage allocation at most, and the rest going to livestock or big game species. And that is totally contrary to the law. It's just prejudice, you know. And year after year goes by, and they just keep squeezing them and displacing them and lowering their numbers and blaming them. And it's basically because the enemies are getting their people into positions of power. Actually, the people that are running the program are not friends of the wild horses, they're enemies, and they mainly serve the livestock interest, or the hunter interest, mainly livestock.
I'd like to also add that I believe that when they interview people for jobs, they make sure that they're going to be unfriendly towards things such as the wild horse and burros. They're going to hire people like that, as opposed to people like you, Craig, who love the wild horse and burro and have studied it in its wild habitat. They're not interested in people that really know and have gone out and taken the time. That seems to be my own observation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. They get people in like Don Glenn and Alan Shepard, who are people who will toe the line and know who's boss, and that means the big ranching interests or the big hunting interests, the big mining interests, which yet they'll give a mine. They'll say, oh, there's not enough water for them, yet they'll give a big multi-million-dollar mining company the right to totally devastate the water sources through a big open pit mine, which drains and toxifies the water for generations to come. And then they'll complain about a few horses drinking, 12 gallons a day to sustain themselves, or burros even less. It's just a big farce. So I'm here to expose it and say that mankind should see these public lands as part of the solution to save life on Earth, and allow them to be restored by these wonderful horses and burros who did in fact evolve in North America. Even the zebras originated and evolved in North America. All the horse family, this is its cradle, North America. They were here in the West. And later we're going to see a petroglyph that I believe is at least 1,000 years old, 1,000 to 3,000 years old. And I've showed very few people this. My mother and my girlfriend once years ago, my Ecuadorian girlfriend, and that's it. So let's hope it's still there. And so we're in for a great day today. Now we're going to go see some of the burros.
Right.
Hi, this is Marietta Valley. It's the old historical mining center where they mined gold, and the old time prospectors and their burros came in and found uranium and gold and tungsten and all kinds of minerals, silver, galena ore, and it's the habitat of these burros. I guess it's one of the biggest left in Nevada. I think their appropriate management level is 125, as I remember. Not anywhere near a genetically viable population. Such a vast area, there should be at least 500 or 1,000, much better. Here, the Equid Specialist Group of the Species Survival Commission for the World Conservation Union recommends 2,500 as a long-term viable population. So this is only about 1/20th of that. So it just shows how our public servants are let down here in the burro. And I bet this area is grazed by livestock, and they probably give 90% of the forage over to the livestock. But it's a beautiful area at any rate, and hopefully this little nucleus can be used to restore burros throughout the West where they have a niche.
Wild burros are protected under the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act, which was passed by Congress December 15, 1971. The burros in this herd most likely originated from stock used by miners working silver and gold claims in the Excelsior Mountains. Several springs around the basin provide water for the animals. During the summer, the burros can be found close to the springs on the west side of Teals Marsh. Enjoy viewing the burros, but do not approach or feed them. Also, please respect private properties in the old town of Marietta.
And they're coming down. It's so important, dear listeners and viewers, that you come out and experience these wonderful animals that are part of America, that we keep them alive and well and healthy by bringing our money to these areas so that they want to keep these burros and have more of them and more of them. You, with your pocketbook money, are the only thing that stand between these burros and the government establishment that wants to get rid of them. The cattle industry, the mining. They want every last bit of land for themselves. They're not interested in having recreational areas for people if you're not going to be here. There's nothing that swells the heart more than seeing these wonderful animals here. Their beautiful family life and their societies. Oh, one's wallowing there. That's what both horse and burros do. He's wallowing, rolling over on his back in the dirt.
I got that.
And did you know that that helps create natural catchments for water that helps many species of wildlife, especially in areas that contain clay?
Really?
And that's something I've tried to get them to recognize, and they'll never admit, they'll never say, like people like Larry Johnson on the advisory board that's a hatchet man for the wild horse and burro. I mentioned that to him, he turned his back on me and walked away.
Of course,
He
because
didn't want to recognize one positive thing about
No.
these animals.
no, they don't. That's why they choose them, because the voice is louder on the cattle
And I've
industry
been
side.
repeatedly nominated and recommended by many fine people, and they've never chose me for a single position.
Of course not, because you want to have the wild horse and burros.
Because they know that I am a true defender of the wild horses and burros in the wild. And they want to make them into domesticated animals.
Yeah. I'd like to say here, listeners, that in Nevada, the state of Nevada has come up with this letter saying that wild horse and burros, or at least wild horses, are not privy to water privileges anymore because they are not a beneficial use animal. And what they're really saying, you see, these animals are beneficial use, if nothing for else but what Craig Downer just described. They make catchments for water. They reseed the soil.
They build the soil with their
They
droppings.
build the soil. But also for recreational purposes.
Yeah,
And that's one of the most important things human beings need,
definitely.
is we need places that we can go and we can view wildlife. It's a $47 billion industry in this country, wildlife viewing. And these little burros are just waiting to come and show you their ways. So it is a direct slap in the face to we, the taxpayers, that these governors here governor here in Nevada says that these animals have no use at all, because recreation is so important for we the people, and they're taking it all away.
That's the Feral Horse Committee.
Yes.
It was appointed by the last governor, Jim Gibbons, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the newly elected governor, Brian Sandoval. So he can dismiss that committee, and hopefully he will very quickly.
We've got a wind factor here, so you better speak right into the
All right,
microphone.
well, it's not necessarily the current governor, newly elected Republican Brian Sandoval, but the old Republican Jim Gibbons that appointed that Feral Horse Committee that are trying to deny water for all wild horses and burros on federal lands within the state of Nevada. That's just blatant bias and attack on these wonderful animals.
So, people in Nevada, it's so important that you write or call your present governor and let him know that recreation and wildlife viewing is very important, and that you want to save these burros and these wild horses from removal, and you'd like to see their numbers expand, because it's taken us all afternoon just to find this small little herd.
They're living in harmony, and they're not overpopulating. Is this an overpopulation? We've seen only about maybe 20 in about 1,000 square miles. Is that an overpopulation? No way, that's an underpopulation. And they're filling their niche, and once they fill their niche, then they'll self-stabilize. But man has to allow them to fill their niche within an area where they have a legal right.
What do you mean? Explain. What do you mean by fill their niche?
I mean, they've developed over the millions of years a certain role in the set of characters that go to make a well-functioning life community. There's all the different kinds of plants and animals and fungi, decomposers and microorganisms, and they've evolved for millions of years here, and so many of the plants and animals have developed what you call a symbiotic mutualism with these animals, where they aid the burros and the horses to survive, and the horse and burros aid them to survive. It's like a marriage, you know, a beneficial marriage between a man and a woman, where each one benefits the other. There's old Stagecoach Tavern that dates way back into the 1800s here. It still has the two main walls standing. These were real lifesavers to the early pioneers and the early miners and prospectors that came in here. They'd be a general store, a tavern, a restaurant, and even a place to stay. So you can imagine all the kind of people that came through here in the early days. This would be a real source of succor or help. Right, here. They eat some of this saltbush in moderate amounts. They can't eat too much of it. They eat some of this grass here, the dry grass. They take little bits of things that even have toxic alkaloids, you know, in moderation, so they don't overstress their liver. They eat bits of rabbit brush. They eat this ephedra. Yeah, they'll eat this ephedra here. They'll give them a lot of vitamin C in moderation. So will the wild horse. They'll eat little bits of the rabbit brush. Probably not too much of that, and it's kind of toxic, but and little grasses and the Indian rice grass and brush. They don't eat much of this because it has some pretty toxic substance in it.
It's called rabbit brush.
Yeah. Here you see these with a little bit of snow left from the month and a half ago. There was quite a storm in here. And that's the old mining community in Marietta. Now here we have a vast area of hundreds of square miles, and we've only seen about 23 burrows. Actually, this area isn't overpopulated at all. There could be little bands up each of one of these canyons, and they could be building the soils and reseeding the soil. So I think there's room for a lot more than 125. This is the Montgomery Pass herd management area. It's an area known for wild horses that are self-stabilizing. They've never been gathered up, and they keep the same population with a slight fluctuation year to year. It shows that when they fill their niche, then they do self-stabilize and they don't destroy the habitat. This is pretty good habitat here. You see plenty of food.
100 head or so.
I think.
It seems to me that 100 horses and all this land is not going to destroy the environment. How many horses do you think this could sustain before it would be so-called destroying the environment? If 2 million horses existed in the 1800s and now they say that it's only 1 horse per how many thousand acres?
Oh, like 3,000 or so. I mean, that's ridiculous. But out here in the west, granted, it's a much drier area. It's in the rain shadow of the Sierras. But I think for this little Montgomery Pass herd, I think there's less than 200 that have self-stabilized here. But certainly in these vast areas, many other herds could be self-stabilizing if they just let them establish a natural relationship. All right, here we are in the heart of the Montgomery Pass herd management area and herd wild horse territory of the Inyo National Forest. And we see some good habitat here. So far we haven't seen a single wild horse or wild horse band, and we haven't even seen a single trail or dropping. But we have seen a lot of cattle sign and sheep sign and signs indicating cattle. So maybe this is self-stabilizing because of all these fences and the fact that they're giving it all over to the livestock, and they're making sure the wild horses don't have access to water or restricted and by these all these tight wire, barbed wire fences. And there could be something illegal going on here too, where they're shooting them. The ranchers are shooting them or something, and the public just haven't discovered it. So this is an area where it should be focused on. I think it's practically empty of wild horses. I haven't seen a single sign, They say there's a lot of puma that come from the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and that's true, and that limits their number, but I think there's something else happening here, and I think it's got to be investigated.
So are you going to investigate it? Let's investigate it.
I would like to investigate it, but I need some support. I'm a wildlife biologist, and I'm still able-bodied, so I just need a little bit of support, a good four-wheel drive vehicle, gas money, just basics that you can contribute through my Andean Taper Fund. I'd be glad to do it.
So you're saying that you have been here in the past and you have been able to always see horses?
Usually coming through in the blizzard, when I came through on the 19th of December 2010, there was such a blizzard, no, I didn't see any, but generally when I passed through before, yeah, I've always seen at least a few bands, but we're going to continue further west here. Maybe we can spot a band, but here I'm scanning a vast area and I don't see a single band. Maybe they've gone a little bit lower on account of the cold. Now this is Boundary Peak, marks the boundary between Nevada and California. It's 13,140 feet.
Well, how much money do you need, do you think, to come out here and investigate this?
I'd need to get a used four-wheel drive. Maybe that would cost a good one for about $4,000. And then for my expenses to do it right, I'd need another $6,000 to say support me for a few months so I could do a real professional job and do the research and the field and the literature search and the consultation to do it right.
So what do you mean in the field? What are you going to do? Go up in these mountains and search them?
Yeah, I'd go up and I'd check the fences, I'd check the water holes. Really, I should do it for an entire year. In that case, you know, I should have at least $30,000 to, you know, a janitor salary or something, and then have the four-wheel drive vehicle like a Jeep or something. And that could be made through the Andean Taper Fund, nonprofit organization that now includes Wild Horse and Burros. And of 6 chestnut color wild horses at the north end of Boundary Peak. They're grazing. They look good they look in pretty good shape for the winter, and they have nice winter coats. Looks like there's a stallion, a few mares, and a few colts. So they're right below the pinyon juniper zone, and we're up here on a mining road. So good to know there's at least one band left here. I'm sure they should be entitled to occupying a lot more of this vast herd area in here. But that's good to know that they're here. And the time is now 3:55 p.m. So we'll see if we can spot any more. They're at the north end of the White Mountains.
And what do they eat?
They eat a lot of grass. They eat some shrubbery and some herbs.
But there doesn't look to be any grass here.
Well, there is grass. If you look at the base of the shrubs, you'll find the grass. You'll find different types of grasses. Agrostis, Calamagrostis, Festuca, all the different ones.
So, folks, do you think there's too many horses here?
No, it's not. It's pretty empty. This is the only band we all day.
But to the BLM, there's too many horses here probably.
Well,
Any more
and
than
not
100.
just the BLM, this is Forest Service land. Remember, the Forest Service is also an agency, one of the 2 agencies charged with protecting, preserving, and managing the wild horses and burros.
Yeah,
but the Forest Service, if you can believe it, is even worse than the Bureau of Land Management.
Now describe what's happening up in the Pryors with this fence line that the U.S. Forest Service...
This was an area where it's proven the horses were in 1971, which should give them legal right. Yet the Forest Service just saying, we don't want any wild horses on our Forest Service land, and we're not going to allow them to occupy it, so they built a big fence. So the Cloud Foundation is suing them because of that illegality. And they're being as stiff-necked as possible as can be. And I sure hope the Cloud Foundation wins, because if not, then it shows a judicial system that is itself criminal here in the United States.
Well, I believe that totally. I believe the judges in this country, for the most part, are paid off.
And
Like
recently,
everybody else.
many of the judgments have been contrary. They've just thumbed their nose at wild horse advocates. But recently, there have been a few wins for the wild horse side, and that hasn't been the case for years. So that's a good sign that maybe we're starting to turn things around here.
So come out, folks. Come out to this wild horse country of yours and enjoy what belongs to you. This is the old Wild West, and these horses are the backbone of our country. And none of us would be here without the horse.
And they're the soul of America.
They're the soul of America, and they should be our national anthem, our national animal, I think.
Yeah.
They're
They're like Americans because they drew from many different horse races, but when they return to the wild, they return to their natural type, which is adapted to wherever they are. But our public officials keep waging a war against them, so they can't fill their natural place and restore their natural harmony and role here. And that's what's so shameful. I really feel for these animals. They're being persecuted much as Jesus Christ was persecuted. And I told that once to the National Wild Horse and Burro head, John Boyles, years ago. It reminded me of what happened to Jesus when he was persecuted and finally crucified.
Well, you know, Jesus was crucified for the animals, not for our sins. It was because he went into the temples and spilled over the tables.
He let go the pigeons that were in the
And
cages.
well, it was illegal to do that, and it was a death sentence to violate a Jewish temple. So the head Jewish priest warned Jesus that if he did it again, he would make an example of him. So Jesus came in again and spilled over the tables and let go the doves and said, "This is an abomination against my Father. He would never want you to slit open the throats of these innocent doves for money." And
Really?
so, yes, that's what happened. It's in the Bible. And so the Jewish priest went to Pontius Pilate and said, "You have to make an example of him." And that is why Jesus was crucified.
Well, I'd never heard that before.
It's in the
but,
Bible. They've convoluted it because the meat eaters,
But-
the meat eaters of our, let me just,
Yeah.
the meat eaters, which is the biggest industry in the world practically, want to protect and make sure that people continue this predation and this horror show of torturing animals and eating them.
Yeah, and now there's people that want to, and many people are eating horse flesh, and there's people even like Sue Wallace, the representative from Wyoming, wants to fire up slaughter plants and have human consumption and export meat
Well, they say the
of
native,
the horse.
they say when the Native Americans, in their prophecy, that in the end times humans will become, their taste for different types of meat will prevail. And already there's tiger burgers now in Arizona where they're raising tigers domestically for food.
Yeah.
And so the ultimate is cannibalism, of which we know there is that going on.
Yeah, I've met people, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia, I met Colombians that like to eat all kinds of meat, and they said that also in Ecuador, where they promoted ecotourism, to go in and eat all kinds of meat, people from all over the place. And I remember this one guy saying that for him the ultimate would be to eat human meat.
Oh my God. Well, apparently not the Polynesians, but in some of the Polynesian islands where there were cannibals, they called human beings long pigs. That was our given name. We were we taste just like pig.
Oh boy. Well, we got to learn to respect them in their own right as living creatures, just like the mountain tapir there in the Andes I'm trying to save. And for their contribution, we have to learn to commune with them as spiritual beings in a magnificent form here with a magnificent role to play, and not just think of our gut and our debased appetites.
Well, the horses were not meant to eat any more than we the people are not meant to eat each other. And we are not meant to eat our friends and those that have been loyal and kind to us. And we must not follow those depraved people that think in that way, for they will only lead us down a very dark path and not the path that we are destined to go to.
Amen. Okay, we're out here in the vast eastern California desert, and this is a horse petroglyph I came across years ago alongside some other petroglyphs that date to 3,000 years. It's definitely a horse. It has the exact proportions, and I believe it indicates proof that the horse was here before the white man came, and in much more recent times than paleontologists commonly say of 10,000 years. I think this could be anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 years old.
How do you know?
Because judging from the other petroglyphs above there, it appears to be quite old. It's very weathered, and it has what you call a patina from the beating of the sun and the weathering, which would indicate to me that it's probably at least 1,000 years old. But I'd have to get an expert in, and I want to get someone that I can really trust, that's going to be horse friendly and not someone who's just going to try and discredit the place of the horse in North America. So this is a wonderful find, and it's part of my new book, The Wild Horse Conspiracy. A man with an antennae and two eyes. This is a bird because you see the body, the legs, and the long neck. That looks like an ancient rhea. That's an amazing petroglyph.
It looks like they saw aliens and spaceships.
Yeah, some people interpret them that way too. Really neat.
That looks like a...
So are you filming that?
I am.
Great. Okay, I won't bother then.
That's amazing.
Sure is. Oh, the snake is up above there, see? So we pray here to the Great Spirit for the salvation of the wild horses and burros, and their restoration and the enlightenment of people. So without that, it all goes downhill. Okay, here we have a little remnant. On this face here, about 70% of the petroglyphs have been removed by vandals, probably to sell for lots of money. And this is just a disgrace. There you see the hands, and you see the various symbols of these ancient Paiute Indians. And it's just not right. I mean, our government has to do something, step in here before they're all gone, because this is a sacred power point for the Indians and for all of us. And we just can't allow this to happen. Such a beautiful place here, east of the Sierra Nevada.
Whole business. Yeah, you're going to bring the ranger out, sir? This is the BLM office in Tonopah, and he's going to bring a ranger out. Guess what? Yeah, because I'm trying to protect your wild horses, public. This is what he's doing. Thank you, President Obama and Ken Salazar, for, what is your name? Stay away from me. We've been for 2 days looking for these horses. Shame on you. You need to help save our wild horses, sir. That's what you need to do. We're very upset about this. Very.
Yeah.
The American public is really pissed off. When I first investigated this whole thing, I believed you. I thought there were starving horses. And I said, okay. I said, the people started sending me footage of the roundup. I said, these aren't starving horses, sir. I don't see ribs. I don't see, how can you run starving horses uncertain miles? You don't have those answers for us. So many, this enormous, vast landscape and 6 horses. It was so pathetic.
What we're arguing for is the fair proportion of the
Absolutely.
horses.
Same thing we worked oftentimes like this over the years. Yeah.
So, we're here to learn and examine and become familiar. So
Yeah,
she
I'd like
came
to
from
see some
Monterey,
starving
and I
horses
picked
just
her
to
up on
be able to
Amtrak,
verify that
so,
what you're saying is true. But even so, in a wild time when deer starve, you don't herd them up, you don't round them up, they're wild
See,
animals.
You won't let me speak. You keep talking.
Your turn. Your
Okay.
turn.
With wildlife populations, wildlife populations are managed by the state game agencies based on reproductive rates, habitat availability, and they issue harvest. Whether a person agrees with hunting or not hunting, each year there are animals removed from that population to manage a population they've determined is effective for the habitat and maintenance of that population. Horses we remove on around a 3 to 5 year basis, until we get immunocontraception working. We look at that from the carrying capacity of the land with the horses for healthy horses. So when we have the extreme swings in precipitation, the populations there is safe and they have adequate forage. So you don't see starving animals every year.
Well, if I may say now. Welcome to this edition of Meet America. I'm Annie Griffin, and we are on the road searching for your public horses on public land. And we have now come to the area called Battle Mountain. It is near Tonopah, the district. And we are seeing a small band of wild horses here. We have just visited with the BLM and tried to understand why they are removing our wild horses at such an alarming rate. And I personally have discovered that cattle on a certain herd management area that is designated principally for the wild horse has cattle on it certain times of the year that are competing with the horses' forage. And then they're saying that the horses have to be removed because there's just not enough forage. Stay tuned for part 2.